Hello, I welcome you all to another session on business research methods. I'm your instructor, Smitha Antony, Assistant Professor at Hope, Department of Commerce, Christ College, Irinalakuda. In the previous session, we have discussed about the introductory elements of research, and in this session, we are going to discuss about research methodology, research process, and criteria of good research. Before moving to it, let's talk about research. Okay. In research, there are two important decisions to make. The first one, what you want to find out about, or what research question you want to find answers to. And the second one, how to go about finding their answers. So in order to get the answers to the question, a researcher should go through some practical steps in his research journey. Then only he will be able to find answers to his research question. So, the path to find answers to his research question constitute a research methodology. That means a research methodology is a specific procedure or a technique used to identify, select and analyze information about a particular topic. But before knowing the research methodology, I think it may be appropriate to present a brief overview of the research process. So what is a research process? It consists of a series of actions or steps that are necessary to effectively carry out the research. The research process involves identifying, locating, assessing and analyzing the information you needed to support in your research question, and then developing and expressing your ideas. That means the research process involves identifying, locating, assessing and analyzing some kind of information that you needed to support in your research question. Okay. So the research process can be broken down into 8 steps. Normally we can see it divided into 7 steps, but I compressed it into 8 steps. That make it more manageable and easier to understand. So let's go through it. First one is formulating the research problem. Second step is extensive literature survey. Third one is formulate hypothesis. Fourth one is preparing the research design, that is including sample design, collecting data, that means execution of a project, analysis of data, including we do test hypothesis if any, interpretation of data, and the last step is preparation of the report or the thesis. So let's talk about the first step, that is formulating the research problem. A research problem is a question that the researcher wants to answer for a problem that the researcher wants to solve. Or we can say that it is a kind of some difficulty which the researcher experiences in the context of either theoretical or a practical situation, and he wants to obtain a solution or for the same. So the researcher can use some techniques to define a research problem, like he can define the problem in general way, or he need to understand the nature of the problem, he need to survey the available literature, he need to try to develop some ideas through discussions and brainstorming, etc. So in formulating the research problem, the research process begins with the recognition of the problem or opportunity. And the researcher must single out the problem he wants to study. That is, he must decide the general idea or general area of interest or aspect or of a subject matter that he would like to inquire into. Thus, the formulation of a general topic into a specific research problem constitutes the first step in the scientific inquiry. So we are talking about a research problem. So the research process begins with the recognition of a problem or an opportunity that we are discussing about. Then if we are trying to formulate a research problem, we need to know 2 simple steps, very simple steps. That is, first one is understanding the problem thoroughly and rephrase the same into a meaningful terms from an analytical point of view. That means if you are trying to formulate a research problem, you need to know two simple steps. That is understanding the problem thoroughly and rephrase the same into meaningful terms. The best way of understanding the problem is to discuss it with one's own colleagues or with those having the same expertise in the subject matter. Now we'll move on to the second steps, that is extensive literature survey. Once the problem is formulated, a brief summary of it should be written down. At this point, the researcher should undertake extensive literature survey connected with the problem, so that then only he can formulate a good literature, he can do extensive literature survey properly. So what is a literature review? A literature review is a comprehensive summary of previous research on a particular topic. Or we can say that it may be a survey of scholarly sources, or it may be related to scholarly sources or related to a specific topic or a research question. This scholarly sources may be such as books, journals, articles, and maybe a thesis. Okay, for this purpose, the abstracting and indexing journals, published or unpublished bibliographies are the first place we can go through it. And academic journals, conference proceedings, government reports, books, etc. must be tapped depending upon the nature of the problem. And good library also we can take help of. It will be also a great help in the researcher. Help for the researcher. So by using this extensive literature survey, the researcher will attain a good knowledge in the field of inquiry. So there are a number of benefits to the in this literature survey. First one, it helps the researcher to attain a good knowledge in the field of inquiry, and also it helps to narrate a particular problem, and he can understand the methodologies common to this field. And mainly, it assists him in identifying inconsistencies. That means a gap in the research or conflict in the previous studies. A gap means a missing piece of information, a missing piece or a piece of information in the research. So the third step is formulate hypothesis. As we have discussed in the first session, a hypothesis is an educated prediction that provides an explanation for an observed event. That means hypothesis is a tentative assumption made in order to draw out and test its logical or empirical consequences. Okay, and it should be very specific and limited to the piece of research in hand because it has to be tested. The role of hypothesis is basically to guide the researcher by delimiting the area of research and to keep him on the right track. Here we need to understand the one thing, that is a hypothesis is a statement, not a question. We need to understand one thing properly, that a hypothesis is a statement, not a question. That means your hypothesis is not a scientific question in your research. It is an educated, testable prediction about what will happen. Like we say, if I do this, then this will happen. That means if I do this, then this will happen. For example, if I never water my plant, it will dry out and die. So it should be based on your educated guess. It is a very wider topic and we will discuss later sessions. So the next step is preparing the research design, including the sample design. Preparation of research design refers to deciding upon the ways and means of collecting evidences, informations and data, selection of techniques to be used in analysis and interpretation of the facts for drawing conclusions of the study. In other words, research design, we can say that it is a blueprint for collection, measurement and analysis of data. And we can also say that it is a detailed research plan. So a research design may be a blueprint. It is we can call it as a detailed research plan. A detailed research plan for carrying out such kind of study. So the function of research design is to provide for the collection of relevant evidences with minimum expenditure of effort, time and money. So before preparing the research design, we should know some points. We should keep in mind while preparing the research design. There are some points. The first one is objectives of the research study, means of obtaining the information, tools of data collection, data analysis, whether it is qualitative. In data analysis, we need to know whether it is qualitative or quantitative data, time available for each stage of the research, and the cost involved for the research. Thus, there are a number of alternative research design, and the choice of selecting a particular research design is largely depend upon the research process. So the research design is of three types, that is exploratory, descriptive and causal. And here in this types of research design, we need to decide the sample design too. And deciding the sample design is very important element. If your sample means a representation of a particular representation of the population. If the sample design is of two types, that is probability sampling and non-probability sampling, random and non-random. If the population is known, we'll select the random sampling method, and if the population is unknown, we will select the non-random. And this also is a very broad topic, and we will discuss in another session. Let's move on to another step, that is the fifth step, that is collecting the data, that is execution of the project. As we all know, data collection is the process of collecting information from all the relevant sources to find answers to the research problem. Basically, the data collection methods can be divided into two categories, that is primary method of data collection and secondary method of data collection. So what is a primary data then? A primary data is a data that is collected by the researcher from a first-hand sources using methods like survey, observation, interviews, experiments, etc. And the secondary data is a type of data that has already been published in books, newspapers, magazines, journals, online portals, etc. Next, move on to the sixth step, that is analysis of data. Here we do a kind of hypothesis testing, if any. So what is data analysis? A data analysis is something referred to as a process of cleaning, transforming and modeling data in order to discover useful information for business decision making. And this data analysis requires a number of closely related operations such as establishment of categories and application of these categories into raw data through different stages. So basically this data processing involves a number of stages, that is editing, coding, classification and tabulation, etc. And editing means editing of data means the process of examining the raw data to detect errors and omissions and to collect them for further analysis. So editing means simply the process of examining the raw data to detect errors and omissions. Next is coding. Coding means translating answers into numerical values or assigning numbers to various categories of a variable to be used in the data analysis. And if we talk about classification, it's simply classifying data into groups. And tabulation means the act of presenting the data in a tabular form for better interpretation. So in data analysis, it covers 4 stages: editing, coding, classification and tabulation. Now move on to the 7th step, that is interpretation of data. So we need to know what is interpretation of data. We already know what is a data. Data means a raw fact. When we put information into that raw data, it will become if we put a meaning into that particular data, it will become information. So what is data information? Data interpretation. A data interpretation refers to the implementation of processes through which data is reviewed for the purpose of arriving at an informed conclusion. Okay, the interpretation of data means implementation of processes through which the data is reviewed for the purpose of arriving at an informed conclusion. The interpretation of data assigns a meaning to the information analyzed and determines its signification and implications. In the previous step, we have discussed that the goal of analysis is to summarize the collected data in such a way that they provide answers to the question that triggered while research. But meanwhile, the interpretation refers to the task of drawing inferences from the collected facts after an analytical and experimental study. So, interpretation is mainly identified for searching for broader meaning of research findings, and it is often trigger off for new questions which turn may lead to a further researches. So, we'll move on to the 8th step, that is preparation of the report or the thesis. Basically, the research report is considered a major component of the research study, and the research task remains incomplete until the report has been presented or written. So what is a research report? A research report is a written document that communicates the process, scope, objectives, hypothesis, methodologies, findings, limitations, and finally recommendations of a research project to the others. So this research report should be in a particular layout, or it should be in a particular format. That it should be include a primary pages, main text and end matter. Thus, writing a research report is a technical task, and it requires not only the skill on the part of the researcher, but also need a considerable effort, patience, and must have an overall approach to the problem, data and analysis, along with grasp over language and a greater objectivity. Here I provided a chart that illustrates the research process. The chart indicates that the research process consists of a series of actions or steps necessarily to effectively carry out the research. The chart clearly indicates the research process consists of number of closely related activities, as we can see through the first step to the 7th one. So this is all about the research process. First one, we define the problem. The second one is review of literature. In third one, we formulate hypothesis, if any. Then the next step, we prepare a research design, and next we collect data, then analyze the data, and we will make a report onto it. So this is all about a research process. So a good quality research always require a researcher to follow a scientific approach. A researcher must follow a scientific method in conducting the literature review, identifying the research gap, writing the problem statement, and outlining the research question and research objectives. So the researcher must carefully select among different research designs, and the selection of which depends upon the specific research question and the overall objectives of the study. So the decisions like choosing among the data collection methods and sampling techniques requires the researcher to exercise a logical reasoning. Okay, now we'll move on to the another session, that is criteria of good research. If it talks about criteria, one of the important characteristics of a good research is that the purpose of research should be clearly defined. That means the research procedure should be described in sufficient detail. That means a procedure that we are adopting in a research, that is research procedure used, should be described in a sufficient detail. That means the procedural designs of the research should be carefully planned to yield the result that are objective as is possible. Secondly, the validity and the reliability of data should be checked very carefully, and the conclusion should be confined to those justified by the data of the research and limited to those for which the data provides an adequate basis. And if we'll get a greater confidence in research if the researcher is experienced and has a good reputation in the research and he's a person of integrity. So in other words, we can state the qualities of a good research as: a good research is systematic, a good research is logical, a good research is empirical, and a good research is replicable. Likewise, so what is a good research is systematic? It means that a research is structured with specified steps to be undertaken in a specific sequence or a specified sequence in accordance with a well-defined set of rules. And if he talks about a good research is logical, it implies that a research is guided by the rules of logical reasoning and the logical process of induction and deduction, and it is of a great value in carrying out the research. In fact, the logical reasoning makes the research more meaningful in the context of decision making. And we already said that good research is empirical, or it should be empirical. That means the research is related basically to one or more aspect of the real life situation, deals with a concrete data that provide a basis for external validity to the research result. And we said that good research is replicable. That means the replicable characteristics of the research allows the researcher or allows the research result to be verified by replicating the study and thereby building a sound basis for decisions. So these are today's topics. So today we have covered a research process and the criteria for good research. Hope you all understand today's topic. Thank you so much.